Understanding generational trauma. Generational trauma is also known as intergenerational trauma and is the emotional and psychological pain passed down from one generation to the next. It can occur when the first generation experiences significant trauma, such as war, natural disasters, abuse, or extreme poverty. This trauma can impact their mental health and behaviors, influencing how they interact with their children. Before we delve into the discussion, make sure to subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon for regular updates. Let's get started. Consequently, their children may adopt these behaviors and emotional patterns even if they don't directly experience the original trauma. To understand generational trauma, consider a family where the grandparents lived through a war. They may have developed anxiety, distrust, or fear due to their experiences. These emotions and behaviors can influence how they raise their children, who might grow up feeling anxious or fearful without fully understanding why. The weight of the past, unraveling generational trauma. Unresolved problems and anxieties within a family can be passed down from parents to children even before conception. This concept, known as impersonal karma, suggests that our family history shapes our lives more than we realize. Did you know that your family history begins even before you were conceived? As an unfertilized egg, you share the same cellular environment as your mother and grandmother. When your grandmother was 5 months pregnant, the precursor cell for your egg was already inside your mother's ovaries. Before your mother was born, you, your mother, and your grandmother were all connected within the same body. This is what embryology textbooks have taught us since the 1900s. Similarly, your paternal line has its own history. Your father's sperm precursor cells existed within his mother's womb before he was born. Scientific studies like the Yehuda study has shown us how stress can be inherited and how your grandmother's biological trauma can have long-lasting effects. The biological development of sperm and eggs is different. Your mother was born with her eggs, while your father's sperm developed during adolescence. The egg cell that became you was fertilized by your father's sperm many years later. Scientific discoveries suggest that traumatic experiences can leave an imprint of the precursor cells, influencing offspring. Your father's sperm development occurring during adolescence and adulthood can be impacted by such experiences. According to recent research, this has incredibly serious consequences. How trauma is passed down. Generational trauma is passed down through various mechanisms. Let's explore each one of them in detail. Number 1 is the epigenetic mechanism. Epigenetics is the study of how environmental factors can influence gene expression without altering their underlying DNA sequences. This process helps explain how trauma experienced by one generation can affect future generations. Think of your genes as a set of instructions. Epigenetic markers are like those sticky notes attached to these instructions, telling your body which parts to read and which to ignore. Trauma can add new sticky notes or change existing ones, and these sticky notes can be passed down through generations. For example, if a parent experiences a traumatic event, their body's stress response may be altered. This altered response can be written into their epigenetic markers and inherited by their children. As a result, the children might have a heightened stress response or be more prone to anxiety or depression, even if they haven't experienced the same trauma. Number 2, inherited behaviors. The behavioral pattern mechanisms of generational trauma refers to how behaviors and coping strategies learned from trauma can pass down from one generation to the next. When parents experience trauma, they may develop certain ways of reacting to stress, fear, or emotional pain. These behaviors can include things like being overly protective, emotionally distant, or having difficulty trusting others. Children often learn these behaviors by observing and interacting with their parents. As they grow up, they may adopt similar ways of coping, even if they don't face the same traumatic event. This cycle continues passing down the patterns of behavior from one generation to the next. Number 3, the power of family narratives. The family narratives mechanisms of generational trauma involves the stories and beliefs that are passed down within a family. These stories often include experiences of trauma and hardship that shape the family's identity and values. When parents and grandparents share these narratives, they can influence how younger generations see the world, themselves, and their place in it. For example, if a family repeatedly tells stories of past struggles and mistrust of others, children might grow up feeling anxious or cautious, even if they haven't experienced the trauma themselves. Understanding this mechanism highlights the power of storytelling and communication in shaping our perceptions and behaviors. Examples of generational trauma. To better understand generational trauma, let's explore some real-world examples. Number 1. The intergenerational impact of historical events. Historical events like slavery, the Holocaust, or major war can cause deep emotional and psychological scars. These traumas affect not only those who lived through them, but also their descendants. Children and grandchildren may inherit feelings of fear, mistrust, or anxiety, even if they did not directly experience the events. Understanding generational trauma through historical events helps us see how large-scale suffering can impact entire communities over time. Number 2, the impact of oppression. When a group of people is systematically discriminated against, marginalized, or denied rights, it causes deep and lasting emotional and psychological harm. This trauma affects not only those directly oppressed, but also their descendants. The stress and suffering experience can lead to patterns of fear, mistrust, and low self-esteem in future generations. Understanding oppression as generational trauma helps us see how long-term discrimination impacts families and communities. Number 3 is the generational scars of displacement. Forced displacement due to war, natural disaster, or other crises create a deep sense of loss and instability. This trauma not only affects those who are displaced, but also their children and grandchildren. The sense of loss, fear, and uncertainty can be passed down, leading to anxiety and insecurity in future generations. Understanding displacement as generational trauma helps us see how the pain of losing one's home and community can impact families for years to come. Rewriting your story, overcoming generational trauma. Understanding generational trauma is the first step towards breaking the cycle. By recognizing the patterns and mechanisms through which trauma is conveyed, individuals can begin to address and heal from these deep-seated traumas. To start rewriting your story, you can start practicing the path to healing through self-awareness. Awareness is the key to recovering from generational trauma. By recognizing the traumas and patterns passed down through generations, individuals can initiate the process of healing themselves and changing the narrative for future generations. Embrace a new you, transform through positive change. Positive thinking and behavioral changes can help break the cycle of generational trauma by creating healthier patterns and mindsets. When individuals focus on positive thoughts and adopt new constructive behaviors, they can counteract each of the negative effects of trauma. This can involve practicing gratitude, attending our training regularly, and building supportive relationships. Final thoughts. Generational trauma is a complicated and multifaceted issue that impacts individuals and families across generations. We can confront and recover from these deep-seated wounds if we have a better understanding of the mechanisms through which trauma is transferred. To break the cycle of generational trauma and create a healthy future for us and our descendants, we must make conscious attempts to change our beliefs, behavior, and the narratives that we talk about in our families.